after a couple of weeks off for the quote unquote holidays. And I hope everybody is doing well. We're still hanging somewhere between no war, imminent war, who knows? So we keep on going, right? As the Gemara says, if you're plowing your field and you see Moshiach coming, keep on plowing. Don't take anything, for granted that it's going to happen. Just keep doing your thing. And so we're doing our thing. Okay. So we're going to talk about a very interesting subject today, I think. It is centering, Baalotcha has a lot of really very, very interesting subjects, but I find one of the most compelling is the idea of complaining, the fine art of kvetching, complaining. We are very, very good at that. I think one of the reasons why we have such great Jewish debaters, when we have the debating uh, events on campus, Jews are always right in the middle of the debating because Jews can debate both sides of any issue. Uh, they're happy to tell you how good it is and happy to tell you how bad it is, and they can find a way to complain about everything. Uh, there's two classic Jewish jokes about complaining. I'm sure you've heard both of them, but I will repeat them anyway. The first is the guy who goes up to his friend and says, I hear you went to that new restaurant yesterday. And he said, yes, it was terrible. I said, really? How bad was it? He says, the food was atrocious and such small portions also. So that's one of the Jewish jokes. The other one is about the elderly lady who's in the hospital, and her nephew comes to see her and says, Auntie, how are you doing? And she says, it's terrible. And he says, what's the problem? Are the doctors mistreating you? No, 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 I not from this I couldn't complain. Well, what about the nurses? Are they waking you up in the middle of the night and treating you? No, no, I can't complain about this. Maybe is it the bed? Is it the food? And she says, no, I can't complain about this either. So what's the problem? She says, I told you I can't complain. So we seem to have this need, we must complain. And this parsha is full of complaints. We call at least this section, if not the whole parsha, Parshat Hamit Onanim or Hamit Lonanim. We'll talk about later why we have two almost the same words for the same idea of complaining. But we complain here about everything. We complain about the shortage of water. I mean, we're in a desert, okay. There's not a lot of water. We complain about the lack of meat. And later on in the Parsha, we see that there's some punishment. God brings the quails that people overeat. We complain, as we'll see in next week's Parshat Shalach, why is God doing this? He's bringing us in through this desert, and we're going to go into a new land that we won't be able to survive. There are giants living there. We'll never defeat them. They complain about the laws given already in the desert of sexual limitations. In other words, who they're allowed to have relations with and who they can't have relations with. They're not happy about that either. They complain about Moshe. He's, he's leading us in a roundabout way. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu, how can you complain about Moshe? But yes, they find a lot to complain about. At the end of our parsha, of course, we have this classic complaint of Miriam and Aaron, mostly Miriam, against Moshe's restrictions and his conduct vis-a-vis his wife Tzipporah. More in the Parsha sheet about Tzipporah, one of my favorite heroines of the Torah. So we're complaining about everything, and it's getting monotonous that the Torah is one parsha after another recording the complaints. Now, one of the complaints that I want to focus on is very interesting. because the pasuk tells us, or the series of psukim. First of all, Vayivku gam b'nei Yisrael v'emru mi achalenu basar. They're crying about this. It's not, just grousing, but it's real tears. Then it says, Zacharnu et hadaga. We remember the fish asher nochal b'mitzrayim chinam, which we ate for free in Egypt. I'll come back to that. And then they list some of the other things. Et kishuim, et avatichim, vet chatzir, vet betzalim, vet shumim. We remember the fish and the cucumbers and the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. Vata, and now nafshenu yivesha ein kol. And now our souls are parched, and there's nothing. Ein vilti alaman einenu. All we have before our eyes is the man. And when we think about this, and then the pasuk goes on to talk a little bit more about the man and exactly what it came from. But the essence of the man, which had many magical properties, was that it could taste like virtually anything they wanted it to taste like. That's why I always say, only half kiddingly, later we'll refer to the man in the pasuk, Et asher tofu efu. And if that's probably the secret, that man was a kind of tofu. You can make tofu into hamburgers and ice cream. So it really can be almost anything. But okay, that's my original thought on tofu. But the point is, if you accept this idea of the miraculous man fell at their door and it tasted like anything they wanted it to taste like, what are they complaining about? So there's two elements to this. First of all, I want to suggest that they give it away. They say here, "V'ata nafshenu yivesha ein kol," that our life, our souls are parched. There is nothing. You can translate this another way. You can translate this sentence, ein kol, to also mean there isn't everything. In other words, we have the man and it tastes like almost everything, but not everything, because we're told that, and they say themselves, we miss these other items that presumably they had in Egypt. Now, of course, they didn't lead any kind of a cushy existence in Egypt. So really, these complaints are not well-founded. But there were items that the man could not taste like. It's very fascinating. Chazal say these five items that are listed here, the man did not taste like them. And the reason was that these, say Chazal, were items that were dangerous for pregnant women to eat. You can imagine that with things like garlic, onions, certain things that Chazal said were not advisable for pregnant women to have. So the man couldn't taste like that. And they asked the question, okay, so why didn't they, just tell those women to abstain from it? So they answer that Hashem wanted to be fair to everyone. He didn't want to give most of the people something that a few of the people could not eat. And he wanted everybody to be on an equal level because Hashem is Hashem and he did a chesed so that everybody would be equal. But in any case, still, this complaint about the man, okay, there are a few things they couldn't eat, but is that something to complain about? So we're seeing, beginning in this parsha, a whole lot of complaints that ultimately are going to threaten the entire community, maybe up to the point where there's a breakdown. And it's part of the reason why we will not be able to enter Eretz Yisrael right away, as was the plan. But I want to say that another bit of a slant on this idea of the complaints, there are actually two types of complaints. There are complaints which are bad cholesterol complaints, and there are good cholesterol complaints. Some of these complaints are petty, or they're mean-spirited, or as we saw with the man, they're really invalid. they're preposterous. When you're getting virtually anything you want to eat via the mun, except 5 items, and you say, we have nothing, we got nothing to eat. And that's ridiculous. The report of the spies coming up next week. Hashem says it will be safe, tells us we'll be able to conquer them. And then they go and complain, no, it's not going to happen. These are people who should certainly have trusted Hashem by then, and yet they don't. We complain about not being enough meat, but understand you for God's sake, you're in a desert. This is not on Delancey Street with a deli at every corner. You have to understand that. So, and certainly complaining about Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, after all he did for the people, I mean, you talk about your hero who rises, comes out of the palace and takes your side, brings you to this point, defeats the Egyptians. Complaining about, I mean, these are bad complaints. These are complaints that deserve a pachin panim from the Almighty, who will punish the people for these complaints. But there is a different type of complaint. Complaining can also be a first step towards improving a bad situation. And there are many examples of complaints that are looked upon with favor by God, by the Torah, by Moshe, etc. For example, Moshe himself, he complains to God, and he says, Hashem, why are you mistreating your children? Look at all the trouble that they're going through, and this is very in the very beginning when we were still in slavery. And Hashem says, at that point, I promise I will redeem you. So there's a complaint that falls on very receptive ears. A second complaint that we know about, and that's the daughters of Tzlafchad. They step up and they are unwilling to accept the fact that their father's name should be diminished merely because he did not have a son. So the girls, the sisters, will lose their tribal inheritance. And as soon as they do that, so Moshe already understands this is a complaint that has a lot of merit. He goes to Hashem, and Hashem comes back uh, and says the daughters of Tzlafchad have a very just argument, and we know, of course, that the law is changed to allow them to inherit after they come and complain. In this week's Parsha, we have uh, another incident where people who came into contact with a dead body and were spiritually impure at Pesach time could not bring the Karban Pesach. So they complain and they say, well, that's not fair that we were unable to participate in this grand celebration of the Karban Pesach. And they use the same uh, verb. They say, Lama nigara. I have to pronounce that very carefully when I say it. Lama nigara, from the word garua. Why should we be any worse than the other people who are able to eat the Karban Pesach? Or in the case of the Tzlafchad daughters, saying, why are we worse than other families? Because there's no male here. We have a right to get something too. And this falls on very receptive ears with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You see this, by the way, reflected in many other cases. You see David HaMelech. I'm very proud to say we finished for the last many years, we've been learning with coffee and Torah breakfast. We've been learning Tehillim the last 4 years, and we finally finished this past week, and we had a siyum. It was a grand occasion. And you see throughout Tehillim, David HaMelech will periodically complain and say, God, what's going on here? He went through hell, being chased by Shaul, being branded a mamzer, and all kinds of other things affecting him. And there are many times that he really laments and complains. One of the famous things he says, call ha'adam kosev, all men or all people are liars. And there's a beautiful shot on here. I heard it from my friend Danny Novick. I don't know if his wife is listening, but she'll hear it on the recording. That call in Gematria is 50. Kaf is 20, Lamed is 30, 50. So by tradition, David was meant to die at birth. But Adam Harishon, Adam, the first person, was shown this by God that there would be this amazing individual, but he was not destined to live. And Adam says, give him 70 of my years. This is why uh, Adam lived to be 930. You would have thought that he lived to be 1,000, and that was the original intent. 1,000 is a nice round number, right? But he gives away 70 of his years, according to this midrash, to David Hamelech. So when David is being chased by Shaul and comes very, very close to be captured and killed, he's 20 years old at the time, and he makes this statement, Kol Ha'adam, and again, the gematria of Kol being 50, the 50 of Adam. In other words, he says, I'm 20. He knew this tradition. He's supposed to live till 70. So he says the 50 remaining years that I was promised by Adam, Kozev, it's a lie. They're going to kill me. So, if it's really true that I'm destined to live to be 70, then I better be saved. And it doesn't look that way right now. Things don't look good. And that would make a lie out of this whole tradition. Of course, David is miraculously saved. He does go on to live to the age of 70. But there you see also that he's not afraid to confront God and say, what's right is right. And I've got this coming to me, God. And, if you do it with a certain amount of respect, then God generally will hear what you're saying, and especially if it's for a good cause. To complain that you're not getting enough garlic, well, in the middle of a desert, that God is not too receptive to. But if you're complaining that I want to share in the land, or I want to participate in the Carbon Pesach, God sees that that's a very good complaint. And that's the good cholesterol complaint. And that is the difference between the words that people confused because they're so alike, mitonanim and mitlonanim. The section begins, Vayehi ha'am kemit onanim ra ba'aznei Hashem. So obviously, because we added the word ra, we know that this is the bad cholesterol. This is the bad arguing. The mitonanim are those who complain for complaint's sake. They are not looking for solutions to the problem. They just like to grouse all the time. That's what turns them on. They love to argue. They love to take the other side just for the sake of arguing. There are a lot of people like that. And they're always out to knock something down and complain about it. Mitlonanim, though, they're different. Mitlonanim are the ones who have a legitimate grievance and they complain seeking some redress to those issues. And they have a good cause. They're not Ra. They're not the evil type. That's the good cholesterol. That's the good argument, as we saw in the case of arguing for the uh, Pesach Sheni, which was granted to those people. God says, I hear your argument, I hear your complaint, and I accept it. And so we're going to create a new holiday. We're going to celebrate Pesach, Carbon Pesach, 1 month after the usual Pesach. Instead of 15 Nisan, 15 Iyar. And because this is the tip-off, it says Ra. If there's bad complaining, there must be good complaining. And so this is what the Torah is talking about and making a delineation. We don't even know, by the way, what when this section is introduced, it says the nation was complaining, but it doesn't say what they were complaining about. But then it says God heard them and he got angry and a fire broke out among them, a bit of maybe a plague, like a high fever, fire, whatever it may be. But God already understands that there's nothing really here to complain about. This is the bad cholesterol, and um, God reacts in kind. So those people who don't even need a specific reason or have any justice for it, it's a knee-jerk reaction, that obviously is bad. But those who they have complaints rooted in a desire to come closer to God and maybe to right an injustice like Moshe did, or because of their love of the land of Israel, this is good complaining. And when it's directed towards God, especially, Hashem understands intuitively, knows where we're coming from, and generally ends in rewarding them and approving them. So we we ourselves have to take a lesson from this, and we have to understand that complaints can be petty and can divide people, but complaints sometimes are exactly what we need. And ironically, there are times we don't complain enough, that often we're too willing, or we're all too willing, using both ideas, all and all too willing, to accept mediocrity in our lives, in our spiritual lives, in our national lives, in our material lives. And we often lack that push to strive for excellence that ensures that good does not become the enemy of great, as someone said very wisely. Not to say, okay, I'll live with it. I'm not going to rock the boat. So I don't think this is very good. But I don't want to bother to make a big tsimus about it and a ruckus about it. And that's a problem. When we see something that is genuinely and significantly wrong, and we don't complain about it, and we just let it go on, then we're part of the problem, not the solution. And we see these things around us all the time when people flaunt traffic laws, and we know that it's obviously dangerous and can harm people, but we don't do anything about it. We read things in the paper that get us angry, and we see them as being very unjust. And then we just kind of shrug our shoulders and say, well, what can I do? And that's a problem that comes from a lack of arguing, a lack of complaining. Because what if Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, at the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, what if he shrugged his shoulders and say, well, listen, it's over. What can I do? There's no point my trying to fix anything. But he doesn't think that. He goes to the Roman emperor and he says, listen, you got to do something for us. You can't just eliminate all of the whole apparatus of Jewish life. And he argues for Yavne and says, you've got to give us something. And then, of course, we are able to regenerate. As we said, imagine if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't complain when he saw the Egyptians striking the Jew, and it didn't instill in him the sense that, wait, this is wrong. I got to do something about it. What if Herzl had remained passive, when he saw what was done to Dreyfus, and he was inspired to say, this can't go on. We've got to find a way to stop this. And he doesn't just accept the situation as is. He goes out and he creates essentially a state of Israel. Ben Gurion, there are innumerable examples we can use that sometimes, as we see in the Torah, complaining can be a good thing. If you want something to happen that is genuinely good for others, or you believe that it's what Hashem would want you to do, then sitting passively and doing nothing about it, that may be a bigger sin than the negative complaining. Negative complaining can be obnoxious, can be irritating, but it the same time, if you see something happening and you have a situation that you really deeply feel this is not a good place, not a good thing, instead of just begging off and saying, well, I'll let that be somebody else's problem. But if instead you say, no, I'm going to do something about it, including rising up and arguing and saying this has to end. And we see a lot of those things in our society, just on a personal level. I mean, one of the most horrible things that I think we've seen, certainly in the history of Israel, is the kind of violence among young people, as we saw reflected in the murder of that young man outside the Pizza Hut. I mean, and you see a mob uh, just descending upon him until he's murdered. I mean, if you see that and you don't get angry and complain, where is the enforcement? Where is the teaching of values to kids? Where is the sense of complete and total rejection of such behavior? Then we have a problem. And so I think that the Torah is teaching us the difference here between mitonanim and mitlonanim. Mitonanim, no, don't argue for argument's sake, just to take the other side and stir the pot. But complaints that are done ultimately for the good of Jewish society or for your own good, you have a right to even address God and say, God, this isn't fair. And therefore, I want to lodge my complaint. God is the ultimate judge, so he'll judge whether or not you're where you're coming from and whether it's justified and whether it's something that's good for you, etc. But certainly, you have every right to do so. The trick or the key, of course, is to learn how to complain wisely. And ultimately, if we complain in the right way, and we say to Hashem, even ultimately to say, Hashem, listen, we're praying for Moshiach. We're praying for Jews to come back to Israel for the Geula. And come on, we're going to do our share. You've got to do your share. And let's together make it happen. That's a good complaint. And hopefully Hashem will hear it and we'll come closer than ever before as we are getting closer to the Geula Shalema. So we'll close with the prayer for our soldiers. We're still at war. Another soldier, Rahman al-Litzlan, was killed today. And we have to ask Hashem and say, enough. Let's, Hashem, help us do what we need to do so that these terrible incidents don't happen and these beautiful young people are not taken away from us. That's the good cholesterol complaint that we all should have in mind. Mishaber Chabotenu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov Hu Yivarech Et Chayalei Tzvagan Al Yisrael Homdim Al Mishmar Tzenu Varei Eloheinu Migbul Halebanon Bad Bibar Mitzrayim Min Hayam Gadol Ad Lavo Arava B'Yabasha Ba'Aviru Vayam Yitain Adonai Toiveinu Akamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifnehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'Yatzil Et Chayaleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah Mikol Negu Machala V'Yishlach Bracha B'Tzlacha B'Chol Ma'aseh Dehem Yadber Sonenu Tachtehem V'Yatrein B'Chet Yeshua B'Ter Nitzachon V'Kuyam B'Hem HaKatuv Ki Adonai Elohechem Olechim Lachem, Lilachem Lachem Imoybechem, Loshierchem, Benomar, Amen. Everyone have a Shabbat Shalom. Same time, same place next week. Thank you to Yossi, our host. And remember, we always record, so we can always send you a recording or to anybody else who you want to hear this share. Thank you all for tuning in. We should only hear Besorot Tovot Yeshuot Benechamot.